Welcome, philosophers and thinkers alike. Today we delve into the wisdom of Seneca, a renowned Stoic philosopher. A master of his craft, Seneca has left an indelible mark on Stoic philosophy, a school of thought that champions mental fortitude and resilience. Stoicism teaches us to differentiate between what we can and cannot control, urging us to focus our energies where they matter most. As we navigate through life's turbulence, Seneca's wisdom serves as our guide. Let's begin with our first quote. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. So, what does Seneca mean when he says, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality? Well, it's all about our human tendency to worry, to fret over things that haven't happened yet. We are, by nature, forward-looking creatures, always anticipating what's next. While this can serve us well in planning and preparation, it often leads us down a path of unnecessary stress and suffering. Our minds are powerful things, capable of creating vivid scenarios that play on our deepest fears and insecurities. We imagine the worst-case scenarios, the what-ifs, the catastrophes that could befall us. And in doing so, we cause ourselves a great deal of anxiety and suffering. We live through the pain of these imagined scenarios, even though they haven't happened and may never happen. This is where the wisdom of Stoicism comes in. The Stoics, like Seneca, advised focusing on what we can control and letting go of what we can't. Our mind, our thoughts, our actions, these are within our control. The future, the outcomes, the reactions of others, these are not. By focusing our energy on the present moment and the actions we can take now, we can alleviate much of the suffering caused by our imagination. This leads us to our second quote. We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Fear, an emotion we all experience, but according to Seneca, it's more harmful than the actual event that causes it. Fear, you see, is a potent force. It can freeze us in our tracks, keep us from taking action, and lead us to make decisions that may not be in our best interest. In other words, it's a form of suffering. And according to Seneca, it's often a greater form of suffering than the event we're afraid of. Fear is a natural response, a survival mechanism that has served us well throughout history. But in our modern lives, more often than not, our fears are not about life or death situations. They're about things that, in the grand scheme of life, are relatively minor. Yet we let these fears loom large, creating a sense of dread and anxiety that can be all-consuming. But what if we could shift our perspective? What if, instead of allowing our fears to dictate our actions, we adopted the Stoic approach? Stoics advocate accepting and dealing with life's adversities rather than fearing them. They argue that the anticipation of pain is often worse than the pain itself. It's the fear of the unknown, the fear of what might happen, that causes us the most suffering. And finally we arrive at our last quote, he suffers more than necessary who suffers before it is necessary. How often do we suffer before it's necessary? Let's explore what Seneca meant by this. Now, unnecessary suffering, what a peculiar concept. It's the idea that we often worry about future hardships, causing us to experience the pain twice, once in our mind and once again when it actually happens. A bit like a double whammy, isn't it? This is where the Stoic philosophy really shines. It teaches us the value of living in the present, of not letting the shadows of tomorrow cloud the sunlight of today. It's about understanding that the future is uncertain, and by worrying about it, we are causing ourselves unnecessary suffering. So, instead of dwelling on what might happen, Stoicism encourages us to focus on what is happening right now. By doing so, we can avoid the double dose of pain and live a more fulfilled and tranquil life. Now that we've explored these quotes, let's summarize what we've learned. Seneca's wisdom, though ancient, remains relevant and profound in today's world. We've delved into the stark contrast between imagined and real suffering, the paralyzing role of fear, and the notion of suffering before it's necessary. Stoicism teaches us to focus on what's within our control, accept life's adversities, and stay anchored in the present. As we conclude, ponder this. How can you apply Seneca's wisdom in your everyday life to alleviate unnecessary suffering?